So our Parsha this week begins a series of Parshiot in which the instructions for the building of the Mishkan and then the execution of the construction of the Mishkan are detailed. In fact, they are both remarkably detailed and at the same time completely unhelpful. If you try to build a Mishkan based on this, it would not work so well. And at the same time, we read the details of height and length and width of all of the appurtenances and all of the parts of the Mishkan, and then we read them all again. And buried in all of that detail, the rabbis sought to find enduring messages. Right? So I want to share with you two things that were commented on with regard to our verse, one of the verses we read, right? Place the table, all right? What was on the table? Anybody remember? Showbread. No, don't ask for recipes. Place the table outside the curtain and the lampstand by the south wall of the tabernacle opposite the table, which is to be placed by the north wall. All right, so imagine for a moment you are standing at the entrance of the Mishkan, and directly in front of you, once you've entered, is a curtain, or more like a tapestry, really, which is mounted on 4 posts, and behind the tapestry are the ark and its contents. And then on one side you've got the table for showbread, and on the other side you have the menorah, which was lit on a twice daily basis in order to ensure that the light was constant. The Gemara in the Tractate of Menachot adds the following. It says, command the children of Israel that they bring unto you pure olive oil for light. All right, so they start with a verse in the book of Leviticus, which says, all right, we built the menorah, very nice, all right, but, people have to bring the fuel so that it continues to run. And there they bring a quote wherein God says to Moses, for you, not for me. It's okay, I'll sit in the dark. Not exactly, all right, I paraphrase slightly. God says, I need no light. All right? On the other hand, the Kohanim, the people who go into the Mishkan, actually do. Right? And it says the table was on the north side of the sanctuary and the light was on the south side. And God says, I need no eating, I need no light. And our commentator, our translator said, note, in a person's house, the table and the light are normally close to each other. We don't really think about it in those terms because we usually have a light that hangs over the table or something of that nature. But in the ancient world, your light was a lamp, usually a small one, and you kept it close to the table so literally you could see what you were eating while you were eating. And in fact, in Masechet Brachot, there's a whole discussion about what time people had dinner. And part of the discussion goes to the question of, does a poor person eat early or late? And you're going like, right? And they each advocate what sounds like a reasonable proposal, which is that if you are relatively impoverished, you want to try to work as late as possible and earn as much as you possibly can. And so therefore, you eat late with the light sort of fading away, and you eat by whatever candlelight you can, or lamplight you can. And the other side of the argument goes, no. People who have limited resources are not going to expend lamplight in order to eat dinner. So they're going to come home and able to eat while there's still enough natural light, and they'll save what limited oil they have for Shabbat when they really need it. As with many discussions in the Gemara, it's unresolved. But it just sort of highlights the idea that while we don't usually think about it, for them, the two were always in proximity to each other. So he's looking at this and going like, well, sure, the table that represents where you eat and has the showbread on it is proximal to the menorah, which is the source of light. And therefore, they put into God's mouth, very nice, I need neither. And it raises the question, why does the Gemara even feel the need to put into God's mouth that I need neither light nor food? I don't know about you, I need light and food. No, we have to sort of step back into the world of the rabbis of this era. What world are they living in? Well, yes, no electricity, but a different cultural context. These rabbis are, some of them Christian, in the Christian world, but even a little bit before that. They're living in the pagan world, and they're living under the Hellenistic empires of Greece and then Rome. And what do the Greeks and the Romans do? Before you eat, you would scrape a little bit of your food into the fire as an offering. And in fact, we read all these stories about how the gods themselves are enfeebled by the lack of these offerings. Perhaps one of the most powerful examples is in the Epic of Gilgamesh, which is sort of a Mesopotamian version of a flood story, in which one of the gods lets loose the flood waters because the people are noisy and he can't sleep. And so there's a flood, and Utnapishtim is given direction by one of the other gods on how to save himself and others, and he builds a boat and saves a bunch of stuff. And when the flood waters are done, what does Utnapishtim do? Bury Noah, all right? He makes an offering. And the image in the Epic of Gilgamesh is you sort of watch as the deities are elbowing each other out of the way to Gazint in order to get to the offering that has been made because they were starving during the entire period of the flood. So the rabbis are living partially in a pagan world where the deities are humans with potency and power that humans don't possess, but with all of the foibles and frailties that humans do possess. And so the Gemara wants to make sure that this idea that there's a table of showbread and a lampstand that provides light are not for the benefit of God. And it's not like the Christian world and the church make it easier, because what does the church do with God? They make God incarnate as a human being with all of the frailties of a human being. So the rabbis of the Talmud are going like, neither you nor you have a concept of God that we can embrace or should embrace, and we don't want individuals in the Jewish world to get the wrong idea about God. And the idea and the challenge percolates for centuries, and Maimonides, in his Guide for the Perplexed, which is the second quote you have, writes, I do not believe that any person can doubt the correctness of the assertion that the Creator is not in need of anything for the continuance of divine existence or for the improvement of the divine condition. Right? God lacks for nothing. And therefore, all the stuff that we give to God is not for the benefit of the Holy One. He goes on, God has no organs, or what is the same. God is not corporeal. There's no physical God. Remember, Maimonides is living in the 12th century, by which time the idea of God incarnate has become widespread, much more so than it was during the time of the Talmud. And God is not corporeal. God's actions are accomplished by God's essence, not by any organ. And as undoubtedly physical forces are connected with the organs, God does not possess any such forces. That is to say, God has, besides God's essence, nothing that would be the cause of God's action. All right? Maimonides does not write simply. Right? But what's his essential message? All of the anthropomorphic language of the Torah, which might lead us to conclude that God has anatomical parts, are in fact nothing more than metaphoric expressions designed to make it more accessible for us. Right? So when the Torah says that God's hand lashes out against Egypt, right? It's not so you should picture a giant hand going smite. It's so that you should understand that it is an expression of God's power. Aphysical. Without it, it has physical impact on the end, but not a physical cause in the beginning. And this idea captivates Maimonides. I mean, there's a little section here, but he writes entire chapters trying to assert and explain all of the various metaphoric language about God, even those stuff that we sort of gloss over and take for granted. Right? How many times does the following phrase appear in the Torah? Vayiraber Adonai el Moshe lemor. And we translate it without hesitation as, God spoke to Moses saying. But in truth, perhaps we should translate it as, God communicated with Moses. What have I just done by changing the word? Less literal. I don't need to have God, but we have so many images of physical God that we don't even think twice about that one. That one's an easy. Right? God sees Moses, or Moses sees God face to face. The divine hand, the divine finger. The throne of God is what we read about at the end of last week's Parashat, and what was beneath God's feet. It's like, so it's the Torah communicates in the language that the Torah communicates, and Maimonides is going like, yeah, it's essential for us to be able to talk about God, but let's understand that we're using the language of metaphor. And in a world that the rabbis inhabited where the pagan deities were human writ large, and in the Christian world, where literally God is infused into a human being, but not in the sense of spirit, but in the very tangible sense, Rambam feels this ultimate push to communicate and say, we need to think about what we say and what we mean by what we say about God. So, we create what we need. We use the language of human beings to understand the relationship and the dynamic of God in the world. But like Rambam, we should be very cautious to understand that we don't mean it in a literal sense. And I'm going to stop here. Well, I'm going to end with an invitation, which is not next Shabbat, but in 2 Shabbatot. Moshe will ask God to describe God's essence. Areini na et kvodecha, show me your glory. Let me understand the essence of God, and we get an answer. And in 2 weeks, our Shabbat Shmooze will focus on, does God or the Torah really answer Moses' question? And it deals all about with the question of divine attributes. So think of today as a lengthy introduction and commercial. And with that, I will invite everyone to turn back to their Sidurim.